You work for NASA and you've been given an important mission to send a spacecraft into space with a golden record bolted to its hull. On that record, you're going to engrave greetings, in case some extraterrestrial civilization ever finds it floating out there in the void. But you have a huge dilemma. What language do you use to send the message? And that's where the real question comes from. Why doesn't humanity speak one single language? Wouldn't everything be easier? Well, that actually happened. In 1977, for this mission, NASA gathered the smartest scientists on the planet, people with access to all of humanity's knowledge, and gave them one task: decide which language represents the human species. So, what did they do? They couldn't agree on a single language. They recorded 55 greetings in 55 different languages, because not even the most brilliant group of scientists in history could solve something your species has been trying to solve since it began. And right now, out there, that spacecraft is still traveling, carrying proof that when humans had the chance to introduce ourselves to the universe as one voice, we couldn't. We literally didn't know how. Why? Today on this planet, according to the most widely accepted count, roughly 7,000 languages are spoken. 7,000. To say exactly the same things. I'm hungry. I love you. I'm scared. Where's the water? The same needs, the same emotions, the same brain, the same species, but spoken in 7,000 ways that often don't resemble each other at all. And that shouldn't make sense. If language were just a tool, like a hammer or a wheel, we would have converged on a single version, the most efficient one, and everyone would use it. That's how human technology works in almost everything else. But language didn't do that. It did the exact opposite. It fragmented, over and over, for tens of thousands of years without stopping. And the deeper reason has nothing to do with geography, or the distance between peoples, or even the amount of time that's passed. It has to do with something much more uncomfortable about what it means to be human. Roughly 70,000 years ago, every human almost certainly spoke some variant of the same language. We lived in Africa. We were a relatively small group, genetically very similar, sharing the same territory. And then we started walking. Small groups left Africa toward Asia. Others split off toward Europe. Others crossed into what is now Indonesia and kept pushing toward Australia. Thousands of years later, others crossed an ice bridge into the Americas and kept walking all the way to Patagonia. And here's the detail that changes everything. Once a human group separates from another and loses regular contact, its language starts changing immediately. Not in 1,000 years, not in 500. Linguistic change begins almost immediately and accumulates generation after generation without anyone consciously deciding it. Linguists have a name for this: linguistic drift. It's essentially the same thing as genetic drift in evolutionary biology, but applied to sound, meaning, and grammar. Every group that split off started pronouncing words slightly differently, inventing new words for things that didn't exist back in their homeland, losing words they no longer needed. Generation after generation, those small changes piled up. And because each group was isolated, with no one correcting the drift, no one there to say, hey, that's not how you're supposed to say it, each group's language drifted further and further from the others until it became unrecognizable. 70,000 years of walking in different directions, with no phones, no internet, no way to keep the language in sync. The result could only be one thing: 7,000 different versions of the same thing. In the 7th century BC, an Egyptian pharaoh named Psamtik wanted to answer a question that already obsessed humanity at the time. What is the original language? The one the very first humans spoke, before everything fragmented. So he designed an experiment that would horrify us today. He had 2 newborn babies brought to him. He handed them to a shepherd with specific instructions. Raise them in complete isolation. No one was to speak to them, ever. Not a single word. Psamtik's theory was that, without exposure to any human language, the children would eventually speak humanity's natural language, the original language, the one supposedly built into our species by default. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who recorded this story centuries later, the shepherd reported that the children eventually started saying one word, bekos. And upon investigating, they discovered that word meant bread in Phrygian, an ancient language of Anatolia. The pharaoh concluded that Phrygian was humanity's original language. He was completely wrong. And the reason he was wrong is the genuinely interesting part. What probably happened is that the children, completely deprived of human language, started imitating the sound they did hear constantly, the bleating of the goats the shepherd raised. Bee. They weren't speaking Phrygian. They were imitating goats. And that error, that cruel, failed experiment, teaches us something modern science confirmed 25 centuries later. There is no natural language hardwired into the human brain. There's no factory default language waiting to emerge if you simply strip away all outside influence. Language isn't something you're born knowing. It's something your brain is built to construct, but it needs someone else to teach it. Here's something you probably didn't know about your own brain. You were born with the ability to distinguish absolutely every sound that exists in any human language on the planet. A 6-month-old baby can distinguish sounds from Japanese, from Spanish, from Xhosa with its click consonants, from Norwegian with its tones. All of them. At 6 months old, your brain was, quite literally, a brain prepared to speak any human language that existed. And then, between 6 and 12 months of age, something extraordinary and slightly sad happens. Your brain starts pruning. It starts eliminating the ability to distinguish sounds you don't hear around you. If you were born in a Japanese-speaking environment where the difference between R and L doesn't exist the same way it does in English, your brain literally stops distinguishing them with the same precision. Not because you're incapable, because your brain decided that distinction wasn't worth keeping. This is called neural pruning, and it's one of the most fascinating discoveries in developmental linguistics. In its first year of life, your brain is aggressively specializing in the language or languages it hears. And by specializing, it sacrifices flexibility. You were born a citizen of the world, and before you turned 1, your own brain had already picked a side. And this isn't a developmental accident, it's the most efficient evolutionary strategy possible. A brain that kept total flexibility forever, never specializing, would be a terrible brain at quickly processing the one language it actually needs to use every day to survive. So your brain made a bet. It traded the possibility of speaking 7,000 languages with native fluency for mastering exactly one, perfectly. And that bet, multiplied by every human baby ever born in every isolated corner of the planet over 70,000 years, is one of the reasons human language could never stay uniform. So far, everything we've covered explains how language fragmented. Migration, isolation, linguistic drift, neural pruning in infancy. But there's a deeper question science has taken a long time to ask out loud. Why didn't humans fight against that fragmentation? Why, instead of trying to keep a common language despite the distance, did we almost always let the difference grow? The answer, according to several evolutionary linguists, is deeply uncomfortable. Language doesn't only exist to communicate with your group. It also exists to exclude whoever doesn't belong to it. Think about it from the perspective of a small group's survival 50,000 years ago. Your language, your accent, your way of pronouncing things is one of the fastest and most reliable ways to identify, in a fraction of a second, whether the person in front of you belongs to your group or to a foreign one. A stranger could be an ally, or a direct threat, someone competing for the same hunting grounds, the same water, the same limited resources. And in a world where quickly recognizing a stranger could mean the difference between life and death, having a language clearly distinct from your neighbors wasn't a problem. It was an advantage. Anthropologist Daniel Nettle has documented something revealing about this. Regions of the planet with the highest linguistic diversity tend to coincide with regions of the highest ecological diversity and most fragmented resources. Places like Papua New Guinea, where more than 800 distinct languages are spoken in a relatively small territory, are exactly the places where small human groups lived in isolated valleys, competing for limited resources, with little evolutionary reason to easily understand the valley next door. By contrast, in vast open plains, where resources were shared more widely and long-distance cooperation was more necessary, languages tend to cover much larger territories. Language, in other words, didn't only evolve so we could cooperate with each other. It also evolved, in part, so we could instantly recognize who wasn't one of us. We speak differently, in part, because for thousands of generations it benefited us to recognize the stranger before he recognized us. Now, if you could still have the ability you had when you were a baby and learn any language in the world, which language would you like to speak? I'll be reading you in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe, or as they would say in China, 请订阅.